What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. This game was kind of a classic Celtics Heat game where the Celtics kind of were stiff-arming them around 10 points for most of the night, and Heat go on a little bit of a run at the end of the game. Tyler Herro gets hot from three-point land. He comes off of a ball screen on Drew Holiday and hits a pull-up three going to his right. And then it's kind of this funny sequence where he misses a deep three, like a 27-footer off the back of the rim. But you can tell it felt good because it was like perfectly straight, just a bit long. And they get the offensive rebound. They work it back around to Tyler. I think it's Haywood Highsmith gets the rebound. They work it back to Tyler Herro, and he shoots an even deeper one from like 30 feet and sticks it. They get it. I think it got as close as 3, if I remember correctly, down the stretch. But Jaylen Brown made 2 gigantic plays down the stretch of this game. He fought for an offensive rebound under the basket on Caleb Martin that got worked around for a Kristaps Porzingis 3 on the left wing. And then in a play where Jayson Tatum was trying to post up Duncan Robinson on the left side of the floor, Duncan was fronting and the ball got worked around and the possession kind of broke down for Boston, but Jaylen Brown came off of a little pin down screen on the right side of the floor and hit a gigantic 3-point shot on the left wing that helped Boston pull away. And then they closed the game on the defensive end of the floor. Drew Holiday finally got a big stop on Tyler Herro, kind of flattening out his driving lane and funneling him towards the baseline. The ball ended up in Haywood Highsmith's hand, who's a guy who can knock the shot down, but he was out of rhythm. And so Drew Holiday did his job by making sure that Tyler Herro didn't get the shot. Jayson Tatum had a big block and help side defense against Bam Adebayo. Then they went to Bam in an ISO at the middle of the floor there against Jayson Tatum late in the game in a critical possession. Tatum knocked the ball away from him twice to disrupt his rhythm. They did like a random switch to get Porzingis back onto him. He misses the jumper. Tatum comes in and cleans up the defensive glass, and they get the win. Another big win for the Celtics, who had an undefeated week, which will be reflected in our power rankings when we get there later on in the show. But I wanted to dive, again, one of my goals for this like kind of home stretch of the season. All of these teams have a really good idea of who they are now. And there's a little bit of wrinkle in there with some of the trade additions and certain teams kind of adding in little pieces here or there that could tweak things. But for the most part, we're going to find out a lot about teams down the stretch. There's no more malaise. Once you get out of the Super Bowl, most teams are pedal to the metal the rest of the way, with exception of the tanking team. So it's like easier to get a read from the effort standpoint. You're not going to see a coaching change. You're not going to see a roster change. You might see the occasional buyout guy that might make a difference, like a Kyle Lowry to the Sixers or a Dinwiddie to the Lakers. But for the most part, you're getting a pretty consistent product from these teams. So it's the best chance for us to learn from these teams. So what I want to do for Boston today is I want to dive into some stuff that I picked up on film that I think will be important for them down the stretch of the season. So first of all, Boston's matchup attacking against Miami switches. This was a huge part in this particular game. Miami in general does a lot of switching compared to most teams in the league. It's a big part of their defensive versatility that they get with guys like Bam Adebayo that can switch out onto perimeter players. Jimmy Butler can do the same thing, although he didn't play in this particular game. And so Boston, in a lot of cases, was trying to pick on Duncan Robinson or pick on Tyler Herro in that switching scheme to try to generate an advantage. As a matter of fact, the Celtics had 30 post-ups and ISOs in this game, in total leading to 33 points. But there was an interesting delineation in the style with which they were attacking and some interesting results in there that I want to dive into. So this is a concept that I've spent a lot of time talking about on this show with Celtics fans, and I wanted to do a more detailed version of it today. So it's the difference between attacking with a cleared side of the floor versus attacking in the middle of the floor. So a couple of things. First of all, from the defensive perspective, when you clear the side, when you allow an offensive player when the offense clears the side and they have the offensive player working with one side of the floor with nobody on the baseline side. So to visualize this, whether or not they're attacking out of the block or the elbow or somewhere outside the three-point line, if the corner is vacant, the strong side corner is vacant, and the strong side dunker spot is vacant, it's a cleared side, meaning that offensive player can pretty safely assume that if he has his back turned towards the baseline, he doesn't have to worry about somebody digging down. If he does see someone coming from all the way on the opposite end of the floor, it's easier for him to identify it. It simplifies his read, so he only has to read kind of one side of the floor, if that makes sense, right? On the defensive side, it's actually easier to load up on a cleared side action while taking away the shooters, because usually it's a tough skip pass that's got to go over length and all the way to the opposite side of the floor to get a shooter. So in theory, it's easier to guard that way. The problem is when you go to the middle of the floor, all these openings are created because it's so much harder to double or dig down without leaving a shooter one pass away. Imagine you're working from the middle of the floor. Usually the open shooter's an easier pass, but there's more to see, and most of the passers in the league can't identify it quickly enough. This is why I talk about on this show. If you're a LeBron, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, all the top tier passers in the league, you want to work out of the middle of the floor, because out of the middle of the floor, those guys are actually capable of making the reads, and the defense is in a much more difficult predicament in the middle of the floor with having to cover ground without leaving shooters open. But it's just really hard for the run-of-the-mill players of the league, like guys that are not top-tier playmakers, I should say. It's harder for those guys to make those reads in the middle of the floor. And so one of the things I've been clamoring for nonstop over the last couple of years for Boston is clear the side. Because what ends up happening is when they work at the top of the key or they work at the elbow, they dig down, the defense will dig down into driving lanes, meaning like the guy will split the difference. So let's say that Tatum's at the left elbow and there's a shooter in the corner and there's a shooter on the wing. In that case, those two shooters, defenders, are in between. They're playing about a 50-50 gap kind of in between the shooters and Tatum, to where they can easily close out if Tatum throws a swing pass. But if Tatum drives, they're in easy position to shut down the driving lanes. That is what actually leads to a lot of these settling possessions from guys like Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Like, we're really critical of those guys for settling, including myself, but the staff deserves some blame for that, because they're orienting the floor in a way that's putting him in a situation where he's probably going to settle. Because if he tries to drive right, he's driving into traffic with an easy rotation to the shooter, so there's not much of an advantage created, or vice versa. Whereas when they clear the side, when they double, they have to leave somebody completely and come all the way to the opposite side of the floor to double team, which makes easier reads for Tatum to work with. It just simplifies everything for those guys. And so this, by the way, this is a concept I've talked about a lot, but it shows up in the numbers. They ran 30 post-ups and ISOs in this game, leading to 33 points. So on the surface, that's good production, right? What's that, 1.1 points per possession? But they ran 16 of those 30 in the middle of the floor. Those 16 only led to 13 points. That's 0.81 points per possession. On the 14 possessions where they ran a cleared side post-up or ISO, they scored 20 points, which amounts to 1.43 points per possession. And that includes a Jaylen Brown cleared side post-up where he drew a foul on Duncan Robinson and then missed both free throws. So that's incredible production compared to the opposite. And one of the big things you'll see too is so many of those middle of the floor ISOs and post-ups are ending in difficult pull-up jump shots by virtue of the fact that there's not as much space for a drive or for a bully ball attack. These guys, you need to simplify their reads, because Tatum and Brown are not super, super high level playmakers. And so by clearing the side, it just makes things easier for them. It is a clear benefit on the scoreboard as well. Those guys score more efficiently when they work with a cleared side of the floor. It's just something, by the way, and we know that they do it. I mean, they did it for roughly half of their possessions last night, but that was a big part of how they came back against the Miami Heat in games 5 and game 6. There was a lot of Jayson Tatum on the cleared side of the floor, especially while they were trying to navigate late game situations. And so it's just, again, I've said this a lot on this show, but specifically with Boston, it's about the discipline and them just being diligent about making sure they get the ball to the right spots. Because when they do, they score. They just do. There was a sequence down the stretch of this game where they ran a Derek White, Jayson Tatum 2-man game on the left side of the floor. Duncan Robinson switched. He fronted to post. Tatum created an angle for an over-the-top pass. Derek White threw it to him. A double team came immediately along the baseline side because, again, if you want a double team on a cleared side, it's much, much harder to do. And so they double team along the baseline, and it put Bam Adebayo in a 2-on-1 situation where Jaylen Brown was leaking across the baseline, and I think it was Al Horford that was on the opposite wing. And Bam Adebayo was looking both ways. He didn't know what to do. Jaylen snuck underneath the rim. Tatum hit him, and he had a wide open layup underneath the basket. On the very next possession, instead of running it on the cleared side again, they ran it in the middle of the floor and got nothing out of it. And so again, like this is a pretty consistent theme with this team. That little detail in execution, and like because of the way that their roster is put together, they are a matchup attacking team. Porzingis attacking matchups in the post. Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum attacking matchups in the post. That's a huge part of what they do. And so floor orientation is going to go a long way. 1.43 points per possession compared to 0.81 based on that specific difference. And so it's something I'm going to be tracking a lot over the course of the rest of the season. They did a really nice job against Miami's zone. Miami ran 7 possessions of zone in the first half, and Boston scored 13 points on them, which is 1.86 points per possession. They were doing a really good job of just setting up Tatum on the right side of the floor and screening the top man of the zone. Imagine a 2-3 zone. You have 2 defenders. When you screen that top guy and Tatum comes off, you're easily going to engage that second top guy. Once you engage that second top guy, you're almost guaranteed a wide open look on the left wing. They got one for Peyton Pritchard there. Then they ran it again, and that top guy didn't want to leave. It's Josh Richardson, didn't want to leave Pritchard, so Tatum was able to hit the Jets and turn the corner, and he got all the way to the rim and finished over Kevin Love. They also had a nice play where they posted up Jaylen Brown on the left block, and they kind of baited Bam into zoning up right on the strong side block. And then Al Horford snuck along the back line, and Jaylen Brown made a nice pass for a feed. So they basically played Miami out of their zone. Again, 1.86 points per possession. And then Miami didn't run zone at all in the second half of this game. Saw a lot of examples of how important Kristaps Porzingis is to the Celtics in this game, obviously beating switches in the post. Trimmed a bunch of clips of that you can find in that thread that I was talking about, his rim protection, and then his floor spacing in particular when Tatum drives. Tatum had a driving layup against Caleb Martin late in the game where he was at the top of the key about 40 feet from the basket, and he beat Caleb Martin to the left and got all the way to the basket for an easy, uncontested layup. But part of the reason why that worked is Porzingis was on the right wing, and they set a screen on Bam on that side of the floor. So by occupying the rim protector with a screening action away from the ball, they made it so that there was no size on the back line for Tatum to drive into. And so when like I've said, he's one of the most physically gifted forwards in this league. So when Tatum kind of gets downhill like that and he's not going up against real rim protection, he's going to finish every single time, which I thought was really smart. And again, like Porzingis is just a huge swing factor for the Celtics. He needs to be healthy, needs to be on the floor. A couple notes on the Miami Heat. Tyler Herro's off-ball defense was atrocious in this game. He was constantly struggling with switches and leaving slippers open because guys would expect him to do one thing and he'd do something else. He just, in general, like he made some big shots down the stretch of this game, and he's so important to this team in terms of scoring pop, but like it's just really difficult to build a good, strong team defense if you've got a weak link off the ball the way that Tyler Herro has been. They're also just not getting anything out of Terry Rozier. He's averaging 13 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists on 36% shooting and 23% from 3 since coming over to the Heat. He's had one 20-point game in 10 tries. He had 21 20-point games in 30 tries for the Hornets. So until they get him going, I mean, you're not getting any of the benefits of that deal, right? Like they're 25th in offense since the Terry Rozier trade. So that's something to keep an eye on. But strong effort for the Boston Celtics. Again, we're going to be covering them in detail here down the stretch as we try to learn as much as we can before making our playoff predictions.